After losing his wife in a fatal crash, he buried himself in silence until the day he caught his twins drawing brother on the maid's pregnant belly. But what his son whispered next brought the billionaire to his knees. They said the Greenwood estate used to breathe with life. Before the crash, before the funeral, before silence moved in like furniture. Now it was just a mansion in Los Angeles, cold, polished, and painfully quiet. Andrew Allen, billionaire, widower, and father of two, didn't just lose his wife that rainy night on Mulholland Drive. He lost his center. He hadn't cried, not once. Instead, he did what men like him were trained to do. He buried himself in business. Press releases, contracts, investments, profits, anything but feelings, anything but the truth. He became a ghost in his own home. A man seen only in passing. Crisp suit, tight jaw, no warmth in his eyes. The staff didn't speak unless spoken to. The twins barely saw him. And the rooms were filled with everything but love. But not all rooms. In the East Wing there was still laughter. Warm, small, innocent laughter. Grace Howard, the housemaid, made sure of that. She didn't have much. No diamonds, no designer heels. But she had kindness, the kind that couldn't be bought or taught. And that's what Trevor and Edward, Andrew's 6-year-old twins, clung to. Grace didn't ask for their love. They gave it freely. She cooked for them, tucked them in, sat cross-legged on the floor while they told stories and played pretend. They called her Auntie Grace, though there was no blood between them. And now, they were more attached than ever, especially since Grace's belly began to show. At first, they just stared, quietly, curiously. Then one day, Trevor leaned in and whispered, "Is there a baby inside?" Grace smiled softly. "Yes, there is." Edward had gasped. "Is it a boy?" She had shrugged. Maybe. And that was the beginning of it. They started drawing for the baby, bringing him snacks, making up songs and names. And lately, they started calling him brother. That morning, the twins ran into the sitting room with a handful of markers. Grace, tired and sore, eased herself down onto the couch. She barely had time to breathe before they were at her side. "Can we draw today, Auntie Grace? On the baby?" Trevor grinned. She chuckled, rubbing her belly. "Okay, but only if you're gentle." The markers touched her skin with soft, wobbly strokes. A smiley face, a tiny stick figure. Then, bold across the curve of her stomach, "Brother." Grace laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in days. The boys giggled along. They didn't know how heavy the word felt to her. They didn't know the secret she carried, or the way this moment made her feel like she belonged just for a second. They were too young to understand that this wasn't supposed to happen. But down the hall, polished shoes echoed on marble floors. Andrew had returned early. And when he heard laughter, real, full laughter, coming from the one room that had any life left in it, curiosity pulled him closer. He didn't expect to stop cold in the doorway. He didn't expect to see his maid, pregnant, glowing, belly exposed, while his sons drew the word brother across her skin like it belonged there. The world tilted. His heart didn't beat. It slammed. If this moment hit you too, don't just sit with it. Subscribe. These stories are real to someone somewhere. Don't miss the next one. He didn't speak, not right away. He just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, the other curling slowly into a fist. In front of him was the most unexpected, most intimate scene he'd ever witnessed inside his own home. His maid, belly round and bare, seated on the cream-colored couch where his late wife once read bedtime stories, and his sons, Trevor and Edward, were grinning, laughing, scribbling the word brother across her skin, like it was the most normal, joyful thing in the world. Something twisted in Andrew's chest, a sharp pull of something. Rage? Betrayal? Or guilt? Grace finally looked up. The smile dropped from her face like glass shattering. "Mr. Allen." "What is this?" His voice cracked like a whip across the room. Trevor turned, eyes wide. "Daddy!" Edward stood, holding up the marker proudly. "We drew our brother. Look!" Andrew's jaw locked. "Out. Now." The boys flinched. Grace immediately stood, stepping in front of them. "Please don't yell, they didn't do anything wrong. Out!" His voice rose this time, shaking the air like thunder. The twins ran out, confused and silent. Grace turned back to him, one hand protectively over her belly. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were tired of being small. "They're just kids," she said quietly. "They didn't mean anything by it." Andrew moved closer. "Why were they calling it their brother?" Grace didn't answer. "Is that what you've been telling them? That this is their family now?" She stared at him. "Isn't it?" He flinched, like she had slapped him with the truth. She took a deep breath. "They ask questions, Andrew. I didn't feed them stories. They came to their own conclusions." He looked at her belly again, then back at her. "Who's the father, Grace?" Silence. Then her chin lifted just slightly. "You already know." That broke something in him. He turned away, pacing, hands on his hips like he was trying to hold his ribcage together. "You should have told me," he muttered. She blinked. "You think I planned this? You think I wanted this? You let them—" He turned sharply, voice tightening. "You let them draw on you like that? In my house?" "Because for once they were happy," she said. "For once they felt like they had a family again." The words sliced deep. Andrew's eyes glistened. Barely. Then, from the hallway, a tiny voice called out, "Daddy, are you mad at our baby?" Trevor stood there, one hand on the wall, his little face scrunched with worry. Andrew looked at him, and something cracked, not visibly, not loudly, but deep inside. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because the truth was, he didn't know how to love what reminded him of what he lost. The next morning, Greenwood Estate felt colder. Not because of the weather, but because Grace Howard didn't sing while she cleaned. She didn't hum while she cooked breakfast. She didn't even look up when the twins asked if they could color. She just moved, slow, distant, her hands doing the work while her heart tried to shut itself off. In the West Wing, Andrew Allen sat in his home office, staring blankly at a document he hadn't read in 30 minutes. His mind wasn't on business deals or market trends. It was still in that room, with the boys, the belly, the word brother in blue marker. He rubbed his temples. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't planned it. And yet, he hadn't stopped it either. That night, Grace sat on the edge of her bed holding a baby onesie in her hands. She had bought it quietly months ago. Soft cotton, tiny gold lettering that said, "Welcome, little one." Back then, she still believed Andrew would come around. That maybe, just maybe, he'd acknowledge what they shared that night. The grief, the comfort, the mistake or the miracle. But now, she folded the onesie and tucked it away in the drawer, next to all the other things she'd learned to hide. The twins noticed the shift immediately. They weren't clueless, just small. And sometimes children feel things long before they understand them. "Why's Auntie Grace sad?" Edward whispered to his brother that evening. "I think Daddy's mad," Trevor replied. "But I don't know why." "Maybe because of the baby?" Edward guessed. Trevor frowned. "But the baby's not bad. He's our brother." They sat there in silence, two little hearts caught in a storm they didn't cause. Or deserve. Later that evening, Grace stood in the kitchen staring at the kettle as it steamed. She didn't hear Andrew walk in, not until he cleared his throat. She turned, slow, unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, finally, Andrew said, "I'll make arrangements." Her brow furrowed. "Arrangements?" "For you," he said flatly. "A townhouse, a monthly allowance. You'll be taken care of." Her stomach sank. "That's not why I kept the baby," she said, eyes glistening. "I'm not looking for your pity, Andrew." He nodded once, too cold, too practiced. "It's not pity, it's responsibility." And with that, he turned and walked away. Grace didn't follow. She just stood there, one hand on her belly, whispering, almost to herself. Then why does it feel like abandonment? If you've ever watched someone walk away just when you needed them to stay, subscribe. Because stories like this, they're real, and someone, somewhere, needs to know they're not alone. 3 days passed. Grace thought about leaving. Andrew didn't stop her, but she didn't go. Not because she wanted to stay, but because the twins' birthday was coming up, and no matter how tense the silence had become between her and Andrew, she refused to let that ruin the one thing the boys had been excited about for weeks. The morning of their birthday, Trevor and Edward ran into the kitchen barefoot, pajamas crooked, hair wild. "Is it today?" Trevor shouted. Grace smiled gently, though her eyes were tired. "Yes, baby. It's today." "Are we having cake?" "Of course." "And Daddy?" Edward asked softly. "Will he come to our party this year?" That made Grace pause. She swallowed. "I don't know, sweetheart." But across the house, Andrew heard them. The hallway carried their voices like echoes, small, excited, hopeful echoes. He hadn't attended their birthday since their mother died. It was too hard, too real. He used to tell himself it was better that way, easier. But today, something about the silence that followed Edward's question broke him. An hour later, Grace was in the living room setting up the decorations with the twins. Just balloons, paper streamers, a homemade banner that read, "Happy Birthday, T.E." Trevor ran up and hugged her belly. "Can the baby come to our party too?" She laughed. "He's already here." They giggled, resting their tiny hands on her stomach like it was their favorite place in the world. Then the front door opened. Andrew stepped inside, holding a wrapped box in each hand. The room went still. Trevor blinked. "Daddy." Andrew gave a small, hesitant nod. "Happy birthday, boys." They rushed him before he could change his mind, nearly knocking the gifts from his hands. Grace stood back, stunned. This wasn't like him. He looked up and met her eyes, not with warmth, not yet, but with effort, a flicker of a man trying to show up for once. "I thought I'd stay," he said, low. Grace gave a slight nod. "We saved you a piece of cake." That afternoon they all sat together for the first time in years. Laughter filled the room, real this time. Andrew watched as the boys smeared frosting on their faces, as Grace wiped it off with mother-like patience, and for a moment, just a moment, he didn't see the maid. He saw a woman who had held his children when he couldn't, a woman who didn't walk away even when he gave her every reason to. He stood to leave, but as he passed Grace, she said softly, without turning, "You showed up today. They'll remember that." Andrew paused, then sat back down. That night, the party was over. The twins were asleep, arms wrapped around their new toys, frosting still clinging to their cheeks. The house was finally quiet, but not cold. Grace stood by the kitchen window, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Her hand rested on her belly as if she were reminding herself, "You're not alone." Behind her, Andrew walked in. No suit, no tie. Just a man in a house that once belonged to a family. He cleared his throat. They had a good day. Grace didn't turn. "They don't ask for much." Silence. "I don't think I've ever seen them that happy," he added quietly. Still, she said nothing. Until finally, she did. Her voice was soft but steady. "You want to know when I found out?" He didn't answer, but she kept going. "It was the week after. You lost her. I wasn't going to tell you. It didn't feel like the right time. Then weeks became months. And then..." She shrugged. "You stopped talking to anyone who wasn't wearing a suit." Andrew exhaled slowly, his voice low, cracked. "You should have told me." "I tried," she said. "But you weren't looking at anyone, not even your sons." The words hit hard because they were true. Rain hit the windows of Greenwood Estate like whispers of warning. Grace had stayed late that night. The twins had fevers. The nanny had called off. Andrew was nowhere to be found until just before midnight. When he finally walked in, soaked from the rain, Grace confronted him. For the first time. "You can't keep pretending they don't exist." He had stared at her, hollow-eyed. "You think I don't feel it? Every second of every day?" "You're not the only one who lost her," Grace whispered. The house had gone quiet then, too quiet. That night they didn't yell, they didn't speak. They just sat on the floor, two people broken by the same woman's absence. One thing led to another. No passion, no promises, just grief, and skin, and silence. And when it was over, Andrew left. He never mentioned it again. Neither did she. "I told myself it was just a moment," she whispered, still not facing him. "A moment I could forget." Andrew's voice cracked. "Why didn't you?" Grace finally turned, eyes glossy. "Because something beautiful came out of it. Something alive." Andrew looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is he really mine?" Grace stared at him. "You think I would have carried this alone for 8 months if he wasn't?" His breath caught. He sat down, hard, as if the truth finally weighed enough to knock him off his feet. He buried his face in his hands, whispering something Grace couldn't hear. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "I didn't just shut you out. I shut him out, before he even had a name." Grace stepped forward, her voice soft but strong. "He doesn't need perfection, Andrew. He just needs a father who's willing to show up." The next morning the sun crept through the sheer curtains of Greenwood Estate, warmer than usual. Softer. Grace sat in the playroom, curled up on the big couch, her legs tucked underneath her as she flipped through a picture book with the twins. Her belly was resting gently beneath her palms, rising and falling with each slow breath. Trevor was drawing, Edward was giggling, and for once, everything felt still, safe. "Can we draw again, Auntie Grace?" Edward asked, already pulling the cap off a marker. Grace laughed, rubbing her belly. "Again? You two really love your brother, huh?" Trevor nodded, looking serious. "We have to make him feel welcome." She smiled. A moment later, they were at it again, tiny hands tracing big letters on her skin, each stroke filled with joy and purpose. Brother. A little stick figure with a crown. Hearts, stars, swirls. To anyone else it might have looked silly, but to Grace, and to them, it was a promise, a celebration. She closed her eyes and leaned back, letting their laughter surround her. She didn't hear the door open. Andrew Allen stood at the threshold, one hand gripping the frame. He hadn't meant to interrupt. He had just wanted to watch, just for a second. But the moment pulled him in. He watched his sons, his heart, embracing something he had spent so long resisting, not because he didn't care, but because he was scared to feel again. Grace looked up and saw him. She didn't panic. She didn't cover her belly or scold the boys. She simply smiled, soft and tired, and let him see it all, for what it was, a family. Edward looked up, beaming. "Daddy, look what we made!" Andrew stepped closer, slowly. Trevor pointed at the belly. "See? He's already part of us." Andrew opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Then Edward did it again. He leaned in, resting his tiny cheek against Grace's belly, and whispered, so quiet, but just loud enough for Andrew to hear, "Don't worry, baby brother, we're gonna take care of you, and Daddy will too." Andrew froze, right there, mid-step. He wasn't expecting that. He had braced himself for questions, awkward silences, maybe even another argument, but not this, not a child's unconditional faith. His legs gave slightly as he sank down to the edge of the couch. The twins looked at him, and then Grace did too. He swallowed hard. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he said, voice rough, "but I don't want to make another one by not being here." Grace didn't speak. She didn't need to. Instead, she took his hand and placed it gently on her belly. The baby kicked. Andrew gasped, eyes wide. The boys giggled. "He likes you already," Grace whispered. Andrew didn't move. He just sat there, staring down at the life beneath his hand. For the first time since the accident, he felt alive again. For 2 days, something shifted inside Greenwood Estate. It was quiet still, but no longer the cold, aching silence of grief. It was soft now, tentative. Andrew started joining breakfast, not speaking much, but there, He asked about the baby's due date. He listened to the twins talk about names. He even laughed once when Edward said, "Let's call him Lightning McQueen." Grace noticed the change, but she didn't let herself believe it was permanent. Not yet. Because deep down, she knew what fragile things were made of, and how easily they shattered. On the third day, the moment came. It was unplanned, as most heartbreaks are. Grace had been up all night with back pain. The baby had kicked more than usual. She overslept, missed breakfast, and when she finally made it to the kitchen, the twins were already dressed, confused and quiet. "Where's Auntie Grace?" Trevor had asked the cook. "Still sleeping," she'd replied. Andrew heard them, and when Grace finally entered the room, hair messy, eyes tired, wearing the same oversized tee from the night before, he snapped, "You couldn't be bothered to show up this morning." She blinked, stunned. "I was up all night with the baby." He crossed his arms. "You're not the only one with responsibilities." Her voice was calm. "I didn't think you'd notice. You barely did for 6 years." Wrong words, wrong time. His voice rose. "You think being pregnant gives you power in this house?" The twins looked up, confused. Grace stepped forward. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're still the maid, no matter whose baby you carry." And there it was, the knife, right where she feared it would land. The twins flinched. Grace's hands fell to her sides. For a moment, it was like everything she had fought for, the tenderness, the trust, the fragile family they were building, dissolved into the cold marble floors beneath her. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd known deep down all along. "Thank you for reminding me where I stand." And then she turned. She didn't even say goodbye to the boys, not because she didn't love them, but because if she did, she wouldn't have the strength to leave. That night, dinner was quiet again. Too quiet. The boys barely touched their food. Edward whispered, "Did we do something wrong?" Andrew didn't answer. Because how do you explain to a child that you're the one who broke it all? Upstairs, Grace sat on the edge of her bed, bags half packed, hands resting over her belly. She whispered to the child inside her, "Maybe some love just isn't strong enough, and maybe that's okay." But her voice cracked, because it wasn't okay, and she knew it. The morning after, the house was hollow again. The boys barely spoke. The laughter was gone. The room where Grace used to sing while she cleaned, silent. Andrew sat in his office, staring at a photo of his late wife. She was smiling in the picture, holding the twins as babies, sunlight pouring over her shoulder. Back then the house was messy, loud, full of love. Back then he knew who he was. Now, he'd pushed away the only person who had brought that warmth back. With just 4 words, "You're just the maid," he had torn it all down. His hands shook, because deep down he knew the truth. He hadn't said it to her. He'd said it to punish himself, to ruin the one thing that was finally good again. Upstairs, Grace sat by the window, hands on her belly, watching the sunrise that felt more like a curtain call. She had written a letter the night before, just in case. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't bitter. It just said what she couldn't speak out loud anymore. "Thank you for letting me love them, even for a little while." Her suitcase was packed. She hadn't told the twins. She couldn't. But they knew. Kids always do. Downstairs, Andrew paced. He kept replaying the moment over and over. The look on her face, the way her body went still. The silence that followed. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. That was what destroyed him. He walked to the twins' room. They were sitting on the floor, colouring. Edward looked up. "Is Auntie Grace gone?" Andrew knelt beside them. She's thinking about it." Trevor asked, "Why did you yell at her?" Andrew sighed, eyes stinging. "Because I was scared and stupid." Edward frowned. "But she's having our brother. You can't be mean to our family." That was it. That was the moment. Not a dramatic speech, not a big romantic gesture, just a child reminding him of the one truth that mattered. Family isn't earned by blood, it's kept by choice. He stood up, walked toward the stairs, And this time when he knocked on her doors, he didn't bring anger, he didn't bring pride. He just brought his heart, bruised, finally open. "Grace," he called gently. Silence. "Please, say something." The door creaked open. She stood there, no makeup, tears drying on her cheeks. He swallowed hard. "I was wrong," he said. "About everything. About you. About what this is." She looked at him, arms crossed over her belly, like she was holding herself together. "You said I was just the maid," he nodded, eyes damp, "and I will regret that for the rest of my life." Silence again. Then she said, "So what are you choosing now?" His voice cracked. "You, him, them, us. I'm choosing everything I was too scared to hold before." She didn't respond with words. She just stepped back and let him in. 2 weeks later, Greenwood Estate looked different. Not on the outside. The marble floors still gleamed. The chandeliers still sparkled. But something had changed within the walls. The kind of change you couldn't see, only feel. Laughter had returned. Not loud, not constant, but real. The twins were in the living room, coloring again. This time they weren't just scribbling on paper. They were drawing, carefully, joyfully, on Grace's pregnant belly. Again. Just like before. Only this time. Andrew was there, sitting beside her, watching with soft eyes and steady breath. And when Trevor wrote "brother" in bold purple letters, Andrew didn't flinch. He smiled. Edward leaned in, placing a kiss on her belly. "Don't worry, baby. We're ready now." Andrew reached over, gently laying his hand beside theirs. Grace looked at him. He whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "So am I." Later that evening, Grace sat on the back patio, wrapped in a warm shawl. The sun was setting over Los Angeles, turning the sky a soft orange pink. Andrew walked out holding 2 cups of tea. He handed her one, then sat beside her. Neither said anything for a long while. Then she asked, "Do you think he'll look like you?" Andrew smiled faintly. "I hope he gets your heart instead," she chuckled. "He's already got our chaos." They both laughed, softly, gently, like people who were still learning how to. A few nights later, the contractions came. It wasn't dramatic, no frantic rush. Just Andrew driving Grace to the hospital at 3 a.m., one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other reaching over to hold hers. And when it was time, he was right there, in the room, holding her hand, whispering, "You've got this. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Hours later, the cry came, loud, beautiful, alive. They named him Caleb, and when the nurse brought him to Grace's chest, tears slipped from her eyes, not from pain, but peace. Andrew sat at her side, the twins peeking in through the glass outside the room. "Is that him?" Edward gasped. Trevor beamed. "He's real." Andrew opened the door. "Come meet your brother." Back home, 1 week later, the family gathered in the living room. Grace was on the couch, cradling baby Caleb in her arms. The twins sat close, drawing on her belly again, even though the baby was already born. Trevor said, "Next time we'll write welcome." Grace laughed. "That sounds perfect." Edward looked up at Andrew. "Daddy, are we a real family now?" Andrew knelt down beside them. He wrapped one arm around Edward, one around Trevor, and placed a kiss on Caleb's head. "We always were, we just forgot for a while." And in that moment, with the maid who became more, the billionaire who learned how to love again, and 3 boys who never stopped believing, the Greenwood Estate finally felt like home. Not just big, not just beautiful, but whole. Do you believe that love can grow from brokenness? That families aren't born perfect, they're made from choices? If this story moved you, subscribe. Because here, we tell stories that remind us what it means to feel, to forgive, and to start again.